blood stained the cold concrete floor, a chilling testament to a father's unspeakable cruelty. Alpha Richard Harrington brutally chained his own daughter in the dark, desperate to bury the secret she carried. But secrets bleed, and tonight the most ruthless predator in the world just caught her scent. Deep within the sprawling, heavily forested estates of the Cascade Mountains in Washington state, a horrific reality existed beneath a veneer of absolute perfection. To the human world, Richard Harrington was a respected billionaire, the cutthroat CEO of Harrington Logistics. To the supernatural world, he was the alpha of the Silver Pines Pack, a man known for his iron-fisted rule and demand for genetic superiority. But to 20-year-old Sophia Harrington, he was simply the monster who held the silver-laced whip. Sophia huddled in the darkest corner of the sub-basement, the damp chill of the concrete seeping into her battered bones. The air down here was thick with the scent of mildew, old copper, and her own despair. Above her, the muffled thumping of heavy bass and the clinking of crystal glasses vibrated through the ceiling. The Silver Pines estate was hosting the most critical event of the decade, the decennial tribute gala. They were expecting the Alpha King. "Keep your pathetic mouth shut tonight, Sophia," a harsh voice had growled just hours earlier. Richard had stood over her, his tailored Brioni suit contrasting sickeningly with the heavy, silver-studded leather belt wrapped around his knuckles. "If you make a single sound, if you embarrass me while King Silas is under my roof, I won't just break your ribs this time. I will rip your wolf out, through your throat." He had left her with 3 new lacerations across her back, the silver searing her flesh and deliberately slowing her werewolf healing factor. Sophia didn't cry. The tears had dried up years ago, somewhere around her 16th birthday, when she failed to shift for the first time. In the brutal hierarchy of the Silver Pines Pack, a wolf who couldn't shift was lower than an omega. She was a runt, an abomination, a stain on Richard Harrington's perfect bloodline. Her mother, a gentlewoman named Abigail, had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after Sophia's birth. Within months, Richard had taken a new mate, a vain and ambitious woman named Victoria, who had given him the perfect daughter, Brittany. From that moment on, Sophia was erased from the public eye. Officially, the first daughter of the Harrington family was sent away to an exclusive boarding school in Switzerland. Unofficially, she was moved to the cellar, fed scraps by sympathetic but terrified guards like old Gregory Patterson, and used as Richard's personal punching bag whenever the stresses of his dual life became too much. Sophia pulled her thin, threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders, wincing as the rough fabric grazed her open wounds. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the sounds of the party. She knew what was happening up there. Brittany, draped in thousands of dollars of designer silk, would be paraded in front of the Alpha King like a prize mare. Victoria would be whispering poisoned honey into the ears of the visiting emissaries, and Richard would be playing the benevolent leader, the protector of his people. The hypocrisy made Sophia nauseous. She rested her forehead against her knees, her breathing shallow. Her wolf, a silent, dormant presence in the back of her mind, let out a faint, mournful whimper. Sophia had never seen her wolf, had never felt the rush of fur and claws, but she knew the creature was there, trapped in a cage of silver and trauma. Just survive the night, Sophia told herself, a mantra she had repeated thousands of times. Just stay quiet. But fate, it seemed, had grown entirely tired of Sophia Harrington's silence. Miles away from the cellar, a convoy of heavily armored black SUVs was winding its way up the mountain pass. Inside the lead vehicle sat Silas Montgomery. At 32, Silas was the youngest Alpha King in a century, yet he commanded more fear and respect than any of his predecessors. He was a man forged in the fires of a brutal succession war, known for his tactical brilliance, his immense physical power, and his absolute, terrifying lack of mercy for those who broke pack law. Silas stared out the tinted window, his jaw clenched. He despised these political galas. He despised the sycophants who offered up their daughters, hoping to secure a royal mating and elevate their pack's status. Silas wasn't looking for a political alliance. His Lycan blood demanded a true mate, a bond forged by the moon goddess herself, and for years his chest had been a hollow cavern of disappointment. "We are 5 minutes out, Your Grace," his beta, a scarred, imposing man named Dominic Reed, announced from the front seat. "Alpha Harrington has rolled out the red carpet." Literally, Silas let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated the heavy bulletproof glass. "Let's get this over with, Dominic. Inspect the borders, check the financial ledgers, and endure the pleasantries. If Harrington's daughter tries to spill champagne on me to force an interaction again, I'm throwing her in the fountain." Dominic chuckled darkly. "Understood, sire." As the SUVs pulled through the towering wrought-iron gates of the Silver Pines estate, Silas felt a strange prickle at the base of his skull. His inner beast, usually a disciplined, coiled spring, suddenly stirred, pressing against his consciousness. Silas frowned, his amber eyes flashing in the darkness of the cabin. Something was wrong on this mountain, and Silas Montgomery was going to find out exactly what it was. The grand ballroom of the Harrington estate was a masterpiece of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the hundreds of elite werewolves mingling on the marble floor. When the massive oak double doors swung open and King Silas Montgomery stepped inside, a heavy, suffocating silence instantly descended upon the room. Silas was a towering figure, broad-shouldered and radiating an aura of absolute dominance that made even the strongest alphas in the room subconsciously bare their necks in submission. Dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit that did nothing to hide the lethal power of his physique, he surveyed the room with cold, calculating eyes. Richard Harrington was the first to break the frozen tableau, rushing forward with a practiced, welcoming smile. "King Silas, it is the highest honor to welcome you to the Silver Pines territory." Silas didn't shake the extended hand. He merely offered a curt nod, his piercing gaze sweeping over Richard. "Harrington, let's hope your pack's strength matches your taste in chandeliers." Richard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he smoothly recovered, pulling his wife and younger daughter forward. "Allow me to present my mate, Victoria, and my daughter, Brittany." Brittany stepped forward, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her crimson dress clinging to every curve. She lowered her eyes in a practiced show of demure submission, but Silas could smell the heavy, cloying scent of imported jasmine perfume masking her eager ambition. "An honor, my king," Brittany purred. Silas barely looked at her. His attention was suddenly, violently derailed. Beneath the overwhelming stench of expensive perfumes, roasted meats, and the nervous sweat of 100 wolves, a distinct scent cut through the air. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it hit Silas's senses like a physical blow. Petrichor, the smell of the earth right after a heavy rain, mingled with the soft sweetness of vanilla. And something else. Fresh blood. Silas stopped dead in his tracks, his chest seized. The beast beneath his skin roared, a deafening, earth-shattering sound echoing only in his mind. Mate. The realization was a lightning bolt to his nervous system. His true mate was here, in this house, but the scent of her blood, the bitter, metallic tang of distress and pain, sent a wave of dark, homicidal fury crashing over him. "Who else is in this house?" Silas demanded, his voice dropping an octave, taking on the dual, rumbling resonance of his Lycan form. The sound made several Omegas in the room whimper and drop to their knees. Richard blinked, taking a step back as the sheer force of the king's aura pressed down on him. "No one of importance, Your Grace. Only the kitchen staff and the perimeter guards." "You are lying," Silas growled, taking a slow, menacing step toward the Alpha. "I smell blood. I smell—" He closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath through his nose, letting the agonizingly beautiful scent map a path in his mind. It was coming from beneath them, deep beneath the floorboards. "Your Grace, I assure you," Richard stammered, panic finally bleeding into his polished facade. Silas ignored him entirely. He turned on his heel and strode purposefully across the ballroom, his heavy footsteps echoing like a countdown. Dominic, sensing his king's shift in demeanor, immediately flanked him, his hand dropping to the silver blade at his hip. "Follow him," Richard hissed to his guards, but none of the Silver Pines warriors dared to step in the path of the Alpha King. Silas followed the scent through the swinging doors of the catering kitchen, ignoring the terrified gasps of the chefs. He found a narrow, unassuming door at the back of a pantry. It was locked, with a heavy, biometric deadbolt. "Open it," Silas commanded, looking over his shoulder at Richard, who had chased after him, his face pale and sweating. "King Silas, this is highly inappropriate," Richard protested, his voice cracking. "That is a restricted utility area. It's not safe." Silas didn't wait for him to finish. He grabbed the solid steel handle of the door. With a sickening crunch of metal and a flex of his massive bicep, he ripped the door entirely off its reinforced hinges, tossing it aside as if it weighed nothing. A wave of cold, stagnant air rushed up the stone steps, carrying the scent so strongly now that Silas's eyes flashed entirely gold. He descended the stairs, the darkness parting before his supernatural vision. At the bottom of the steps lay a heavy iron door, completely out of place in a modern mansion. Silas didn't bother with the handle. He kicked the door right at the lock mechanism. The iron buckled, the stone frame shattered, and the door flew open with a deafening crash. Silas stepped into the freezing sub-basement. The air was thick with the scent of silver and suffering. His eyes scanned the shadows until they landed on a small, fragile figure huddled in the corner, chained to a thick iron ring bolted to the wall. Sophia gasped, throwing her bruised arms over her head, expecting the crash to be her father coming to deliver another beating. "I'm sorry," she whispered instinctively, her voice a raspy, broken sound. "I didn't make a noise. Please, Alpha, I was quiet." Silas froze. The world seemed to stop spinning. He took in her tangled, dirt-matted hair, the ragged, blood-soaked t-shirt that hung off her emaciated frame, and the terrifyingly fresh, weeping silver burns striping her pale skin. She was so small, so completely broken. The Alpha King dropped to his knees on the filthy concrete. The fury radiating from him was so intense it caused the air in the room to crackle with static electricity. Yet his movements were agonizingly gentle as he reached out toward her. "Don't touch me," Sophia flinched, curling into a tighter ball, trembling violently. "I will not hurt you," Silas swore, his voice thick with an emotion he had never felt before. He projected a wave of calming, protective warmth through his aura, trying to soothe the terrified girl. "Look at me, little wolf. Please." Slowly, hesitantly, Sophia lowered her arms. She lifted her head, and for the first time, her large, frightened green eyes met the glowing amber eyes of the Alpha King. The moment their gazes locked, a powerful, electric shockwave rippled through both of them. Sophia gasped, her hands flying to her chest. The dormant, suppressed wolf inside her suddenly slammed against her rib cage, howling not in pain, but in desperate, joyous recognition. Silas reached out, his large, warm hand gently cupping her bruised cheek. His thumb brushed away a streak of dirt and dried blood. "Mine," the king breathed, the word a sacred vow echoing in the damp cellar. He looked up, his golden eyes locking onto Richard Harrington, who stood paralyzed in the doorway. Silas's voice dropped to a demonic, blood-chilling register. "Who did this to my queen?" The silence in the freezing sub-basement was thick enough to choke on. Richard Harrington's face drained of all color, his polished, billionaire alpha facade crumbling into an expression of sheer, unadulterated terror. "Your Grace," Richard stammered, his voice trembling violently. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding. That creature is a feral rogue we captured trespassing on our borders. She is afflicted with madness. I kept her down here for the safety of my pack." A low, vibrating snarl ripped from Silas Montgomery's chest, cutting Richard off. It wasn't the sound of a man, nor an ordinary werewolf. It was the primordial, terrifying growl of a lichen king whose soul had just been ignited by the mate bond, only to find his other half brutalized. Silas didn't even stand up. He kept one arm protectively wrapped around Sophia's frail, shaking shoulders. With his free hand, he reached out and grasped the thick iron chain connecting her wrist to the wall. He didn't use a key. With a sickening groan of stressed metal and a terrifying flex of his arm, Silas simply ripped the heavy steel links apart as if they were made of brittle plastic. Sophia gasped, squeezing her eyes shut as the heavy cuffs fell away from her bruised wrists. For the first time in her life, the paralyzing, cold bite of the silver was gone. In its place was the radiating, furnace-like heat of Silas's skin pressing against hers. "You lie to your king," Silas spoke, his voice deadly calm, which was infinitely more terrifying than his roar. He carefully lifted Sophia into his arms, rising to his full, imposing height. She weighed nothing to him. She was horrifyingly light, her ribs pressing against his solid chest. She instinctively buried her face into the crook of his neck, inhaling the intoxicating scent of cedar and thunderstorms that seemed to instantly soothe the agonizing throb of her wounds. I swear it, my king," Richard babbled, taking a step backward toward the stairs. "She is dangerous." Silas turned, his golden eyes burning like miniature suns. "Her blood sings to mine, Harrington. She carries your scent, though it is soured by your cruelty. This is your blood, your daughter. And you chained her in the dark like an animal." Dominic Reed, the beta, stepped into the doorway, his own eyes flashing with dangerous realization as he took in the horrific scene. He saw the silver-laced whip hanging casually on a nearby hook and the fresh blood pooling on the concrete. "Beta Dominic," Silas commanded, his voice echoing up the stone stairwell. "Secure Alpha Harrington. If he resists, break his legs." "With pleasure, sire," Dominic growled, stepping forward with lethal intent. Silas carried Sophia up the stairs, shielding her face from the harsh fluorescent lights of the catering kitchen. As they burst through the swinging doors and back into the grand ballroom, the collective gasp of hundreds of elite werewolves sucked the air from the room. Victoria and Brittany, who had been anxiously waiting near the grand staircase, froze. The crystal champagne flute in Victoria's hand slipped from her grasp, shattering against the marble floor. "Oh my God," Brittany whispered, her eyes wide with horror. Not for Sophia, but for the ruin of their family's reputation. "What is he doing with the runt?" Silas paused in the center of the ballroom. The music had abruptly cut off. Every eye was glued to the Alpha King, holding a battered, bloodied girl in his arms. The scent of her fresh wounds, mingling with the unmistakable, powerful pheromones of a royal mate bond, washed over the crowd. "Hear me, Silver Pines," Silas's voice boomed, imbued with the ancient, compelling power of the Alpha Command. Every wolf in the room instinctively dropped to one knee, bowing their heads in absolute submission. "Your Alpha, Richard Harrington, has committed high treason against the crown. He has tortured and imprisoned his own flesh and blood. But worse, he has spilled the blood of your queen. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the kneeling crowd. Queen, the disgraced, forgotten daughter of Richard Harrington, was the Lycan King's true mate? Victoria, driven by sheer desperation and blind ambition, scrambled forward, falling to her knees at Silas's feet. Your Grace, please, you cannot mean this. Sophia is broken. She cannot even shift. She is a useless Omega. Take Brittany. She is strong. She is a pure-blood. She is... Silas merely looked down at Victoria with an expression of absolute disgust. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten her. He simply unleashed a fraction of his terrifying aura, directing the crushing weight of his dominance solely onto Victoria. She collapsed flat against the marble floor, gasping for air, pinned down by the sheer, suffocating pressure of his power. Speak of my mate with such disrespect again, Silas whispered coldly, and I will tear your tongue from your throat. He turned his gaze to the rest of the silent, terrified pack. As of this moment, Richard Harrington is stripped of his title. His assets are seized by the Crown. He will be taken to the royal dungeons to await trial. Silver Pines is now under the direct jurisdiction of my beta. Sophia trembled in his arms, the overwhelming stimulation of the ballroom threatening to drag her into unconsciousness. She clutched the lapel of his charcoal suit, her voice a tiny, fractured whisper. Please, take me away from here. Silas's expression softened instantly as he looked down at her. I've got you, my beautiful girl, he murmured, his thumb gently stroking her hair. You will never see this place again. With his queen secured against his chest, Silas strode out of the opulent mansion and into the cool mountain night, leaving the shattered legacy of the Harrington family in the dust. The royal citadel, located high in the remote peaks of the Rocky Mountains, was a fortress of ancient stone and modern luxury. For 3 weeks, Sophia lived in a haze of soft linen, state-of-the-art medical care, and the constant, unwavering presence of Silas. Dr. Sullivan, the royal physician, had been appalled by the extent of Sophia's injuries. The silver burns on her back were deep, but the true damage was internal. He has been lacing her food with liquid silver for years, Dr. Sullivan had reported to Silas, his voice tight with anger, while Sophia slept in the royal suite. It wasn't just physical abuse, Your Grace. It was a systematic suppression of her wolf. The silver kept her cellular structure in a constant state of decay, preventing her from ever initiating a shift. Silas had shattered a solid oak table with a single punch upon hearing the news, vowing to make Richard's upcoming trial a public spectacle of agony. But as the silver slowly leached from Sophia's system, replaced by a nutrient-rich diet and the restorative healing proximity of her mate, something miraculous began to happen. The silent, dormant wolf inside her mind began to pace. It wasn't whimpering anymore. It was growing. One evening, as a heavy thunderstorm rolled over the citadel, Sophia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their suite, watching the lightning arc across the sky. She wore a simple, elegant silk robe. Her bruises faded to pale yellow, her once hollow cheeks filling out to reveal striking, aristocratic features. Silas stepped up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist, resting his chin on the top of her head. You are thinking loudly, my queen, he murmured. I was just thinking about my mother, Sophia said softly, leaning back into his warmth. Abigail, I barely remember her, but I remember she smelled like rain, like petrichor. Silas went still. He gently turned her around to face him. Sophia, Dr. Sullivan completed the deep genetic sequencing on your blood today, to ensure the silver hadn't caused permanent chromosomal damage. He paused, his amber eyes searching hers. There's something you need to know about your mother. Sophia frowned, a knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. What is it? Your mother wasn't just an ordinary wolf, Sophia. Her maiden name was Sterling. She was a direct descendant of the lost northern Lycan bloodline. Silas took her hands in his. Richard didn't suppress your wolf just out of cruelty. He did it out of fear. A female Lycan hybrid would possess strength that could easily rival an alpha's. The pack would have felt your power the moment you turned 16. You would have naturally usurped his command. Sophia's breath hitched. The puzzle pieces violently snapped into place. Her mother's sudden, mysterious death. Richard's immediate remarriage. The brutal beatings that specifically targeted her whenever she showed any signs of defiance. He hadn't just hated her. He was terrified of her. He killed her, Sophia whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. He killed my mother to steal her pack, and he locked me away so I could never take it back. As the truth settled into her bones, a spark ignited deep within Sophia's soul. It wasn't fear. It was a pure, white-hot, magnificent rage. The wolf inside her mind didn't just howl, it roared. Suddenly, a searing heat ripped through Sophia's veins. She gasped, stumbling backward as her bones began to pop and realign. "Sophia!" Silas stepped forward, but he immediately recognized the signs. He stopped, his eyes wide with awe, giving her space. It was agonizing, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. The shift she had been denied for years finally erupted. The silk robe tore as her body expanded, muscles coiling and lengthening with supernatural speed. Within seconds, standing on the plush rug of the royal suite, was not a broken girl, but a massive, breathtaking Lycan. Her fur was as white as freshly fallen snow, shimmering with an ethereal silver undertone. She stood nearly as tall as Silas, her muscles rippling with raw, untested power. Her eyes, once a frightened human green, were now a glowing, piercing emerald. Silas dropped to one knee, baring his neck to her in a profound display of respect and adoration. "My beautiful queen," he rasped, his own inner beast purring loudly in submission to his powerful mate. Sophia let out a long, triumphant howl that rattled the reinforced glass of the windows and echoed across the entire mountain range, announcing to the world that the true alpha of Silver Pines had finally awakened. 2 days later, Sophia walked down the cold, damp corridors of the royal dungeons. She wasn't wearing rags anymore. She was dressed in a tailored crimson power suit, her head held high, the air crackling with her overwhelming alpha aura. Silas walked a few paces behind her, offering silent, unwavering support. She stopped in front of a heavy iron door, identical to the one she had been trapped behind for years. Inside, Richard Harrington sat on a wooden bench, looking haggard, stripped of his expensive suits and his arrogant sneer. When he looked up and saw Sophia, he flinched. He could feel it instantly, the terrifying, crushing pressure of a Lycan queen's dominance. It forced him to his knees against his will. "Sophia!" Richard choked out, his eyes wide with horror as he looked at the powerful, regal woman standing before him. Sophia looked down at the man who had stolen her childhood, murdered her mother, and tried to break her spirit. She felt no fear. She felt absolutely nothing for him, but a cold, clinical detachment. "The Silver Pines pack has officially petitioned the Crown to have you executed for your crimes against my mother and myself," Sophia said, her voice smooth and hard as diamond. "I have approved the petition." Richard sobbed, crawling toward the bars. "Sophia, please, I am your father. I gave you life." "You gave me a cage, Richard," Sophia replied coldly, turning her back on him. "And now you will die in one." She walked away, ignoring his pathetic screams echoing off the stone walls. When she reached the end of the corridor, Silas was waiting for her. He offered his arm, a proud, loving smile on his handsome face. Sophia took it, leaning against him as they walked out of the darkness and into the bright, sunlit courtyard of the citadel. Hundreds of pack members, including the newly freed and grateful wolves of Silver Pines, were gathered, waiting to witness the official mating ceremony and coronation. Sophia took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. She was no longer the bruised, forgotten girl in the basement. She was Sophia Montgomery, the Lycan Queen, and her reign had only just begun. Did Sophia's journey from a broken captive to a powerful Lycan Queen leave you breathless? If you loved this tale of betrayal, fated mates, and ultimate revenge, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share this story with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling werewolf audiobooks and epic love stories. Your support helps us bring more wild tales to life.